Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're trying to piece together a really challenging stack of material. It's all over the place, in a way.
It really is.
We're zooming way out to look at these huge global flashpoints.
Yeah.
Military ambitions, high-stakes diplomacy, fights over sovereignty.
And then at the same time, we're zooming right back in.
Right back in to these very quiet, very real domestic strains that affect, people's ability to eat, to go shopping, to just feel secure in their own homes.
And that's the core tension, isn't it? The sources show a world that's kind of operating on these two high-pressure tracks at the very same time.
Exactly.
On one hand, you have powerful nations making these really aggressive geopolitical moves. They're asserting their influence everywhere, whether it's in the freezing, resource-rich Arctic
or through direct military pressure in the Caribbean.
Precisely. But then, on the other hand, the sources highlight these severe, just grinding social and economic pressures facing ordinary people. From the mass displacement of refugees, people who don't want to move, all the way to the financial breaking point of, say, a food bank in a wealthy, developed nation.
So our mission today, for you, the listener, is to not just lay these headlines next to each other, but to try and give you a clear, synthesized understanding of how these complex global realities are actually, well, they're absolutely interconnected.
Yeah.
We're looking at the real measurable price of power, both the capital that's spent abroad on military adventures and, the social capital that's spent at home on a safety net that's starting to fray.
And it forces us to confront that question of priorities. Where are the world's leaders actually investing their time, their money, their diplomatic capital?
And what does that mean for the citizens who are supposed to be benefiting from all that national security?
What are the consequences? Exactly.
Okay, so let's try to unpack this enormous global puzzle. We should start right away with these geopolitical ambitions and escalating conflicts. And look, there is maybe no clearer display of this assertive, almost confrontational strategy right now than what we're seeing from recent U.S. foreign policy. They're making these simultaneous, aggressive claims in two totally different parts of the Western Hemisphere. We have to begin with this enduring and, frankly, pretty shocking demand that just keeps coming back up.
U.S. claim on Greenland.
Yes, the U.S. claim on Greenland. Now, this isn't a brand new idea, of course, but the sources are confirming that President Trump has recently reasserted his insistence on U.S. ownership of the island.
Right. This is a follow-up to those initial, very high-profile claims he made a few months ago.
And from an outsider's perspective, it's just hard to grasp the sheer audacity of it. You're demanding ownership of a territory that belongs to a close NATO ally.
To Denmark, yeah.
It's just wild.
It definitely raises a lot of eyebrows, diplomatically speaking. But what's crucial to understand here is that the U.S. rationale, it's not based on some historical curiosity or just a political whim.
No, it's strategic.
It's deeply, explicitly strategic.
Yeah.
The justification they're providing is rooted in established national security and economic interests. It reflects a strategy that now sees the entire Arctic as, well, increasingly vital for the coming decades.
So it's a resource play that's been sort of wrapped in a security blanket.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Okay, so let's break down that justification. Beyond just, strategic positioning, what are the specific things that make Greenland such a geopolitical obsession right now?
Well, the military significance is, and always has been, paramount. Geographically, Greenland just occupies this incredibly crucial location. It's situated directly between the United States and Russia.
The old Cold War logic.
Exactly. And that positioning means that if, God forbid, a global conflict were to escalate, control over Greenland translates directly into control over vital aerospace and maritime transit routes.
And we tend to forget just how important it was during the last major global standoff, the Cold War.
We really do. We need to remember that history. At the height of the Cold War, the U.S. operated this huge network of military facilities on the island. We're talking over 20 different bases, radar sites, listening posts.
And now?
Today, there's only one major military base still operational there. It's Pacific, which most people know as Thule Air Base. And it's still critical for things like missile warning and space surveillance.
So this demand to buy it, or, maybe pressure Denmark into handing it over, it's really about reasserting that old dominance.
It signifies a massive strategic desire to do just that, to reassert dominance and control over a rapidly changing strategic area. the ice is receding, the area is navigable for longer. It fundamentally changes the whole security calculus.
So it's about geographical control,
Right.
but the sources make it crystal clear it's also about what's under the ice.
Oh, absolutely. That's the huge economic dimension powering the whole claim.
Resources.
The resources. I mean, geologists know the island is sitting on critical raw materials. We're talking about vast, economically attractive deposits of natural gas, crude oil, precious minerals like gold and uranium.
But the real prize, right, as far as modern tech and defense systems go, it has to be the rare earth materials.
That's the jackpot. Crucially, Greenland has these significant reserves of rare earths. That's a collection of 17 elements that are just essential for modern technology.
So everything from our phones to...
Everything. Your cell phone, high-performance batteries, all the way up to advanced defense systems, missile guidance, stealth technology.
And right now, China has a stranglehold on that market.
China dominates the global supply chain for a lot of these materials. So for the U.S., gaining control over Greenland's reserves would be a massive geopolitical chip. It would stabilize their supply, reduce their dependence on rivals for materials that are absolutely critical to their future military and industrial strength.
And this all ties into your third point, the changing nature of Arctic transport.
Yes. The climate crisis is, paradoxically, opening up new strategic waterways. As that Arctic ice melts, Greenland's location along these emerging shipping routes to Asia becomes more and more important.
So if you control Greenland,
You control a significant observation post, a potential choke point for these new commercial and military sea lanes. So it's this convergence military history, untapped resource wealth, and vital shipping access that forms the undeniable core of the U.S. argument.
and the administration didn't just, casually mention this in a press briefing. They packaged this demand with a very specific justification.
They did. The framing was critical for how it would play internationally. Trump specifically justified the claim by pointing to the increasing and very visible presence of Russian and Chinese vessels, military and commercial, along the coast of Greenland.
Framing it as an immediate security threat.
Exactly. A threat that he implied Denmark is maybe incapable or unwilling to manage on its own.
And to move this from just a talking point to something more tangible, they appointed a very specific person to go and pursue it.
And that's where the action becomes, well, overtly provocative. The president appointed a special envoy, Jeff Landry, who's the sitting governor of Louisiana.
That's it, Governor.
A state governor specifically tasked with discussing the possibility of Greenland becoming part of the USA. Now, the critique here, and I think it's a fair one, is that sending a domestic governor, someone who doesn't typically handle high-stakes international territorial acquisitions,
Right.
might be seen by an ally like Denmark as, well, almost a diplomatic insult, or at least a signal that the U.S. isn't viewing the discussion as truly serious, yet is still willing to push the issue aggressively. It just shows a commitment to pursuing this, regardless of allied sensitivities.
And the international reaction was, I imagine, pretty swift and alarmed.
The response from Copenhagen, from the EU, and from the local authorities in Greenland itself was this mixture of anger, shock, and just genuine confusion.
I can believe it.
They were very quick to reassert that Greenland, while it governs itself largely autonomously, remains a critical and integral part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Their unified message was sharp, challenging that sovereignty is completely unacceptable. The idea of a special envoy just negotiating a takeover was denounced as a breach of diplomatic etiquette.
It just highlights this huge disconnect, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Between Washington's view of its own urgent needs and the reality of international sovereignty held by its allies.
A vast disconnect.
And that aggressive move in the far north, it connects, thematically at least, to the pressure that's being applied at the same time in the far south of the Western Hemisphere.
The crisis in Venezuela.
The crisis in Venezuela. It really does seem like the U.S. is drawing a hard line everywhere in the hemisphere.
Yeah.
If they're pressuring a NATO ally in the Arctic, they're using an even heavier hand right on their own doorstep in the Caribbean.
Well, if you zoom out and you connect those two flashpoints, Greenland and Venezuela, it clearly maps onto a new, more ideological U.S. national security strategy.
Yeah.
And this strategy is, without a doubt, focused on concentrating American influence and establishing clear control in the Western Hemisphere. They view it as America's vital sphere of influence.
In Venezuela, with its anti-U.S. government and its alliances with Russia and China, represents the most pressing challenge to that dominance.
The most immediate one, absolutely.
And the tactics being used there are They're far more overtly aggressive than anything we're seeing in the Arctic.
Yeah.
It's a combination of significant military mobilization and severe targeted economic pressure.
All aimed squarely at forcing a change in leadership.
Right.
That's absolutely correct. We've seen some highly aggressive tactics deployed in the Caribbean. The U.S. has concentrated a significant number of warships right off the coast of Venezuela. That's a very clear signal of intent, a visible threat right on Venezuela's doorstep.
And then there are all the announcements about naval expansion.
Right. Building more warships, even naming a new class of vessels after President Trump, rebranding the fleet, the Golden Fleet. All of that signals a long-term commitment to naval projection and regional dominance. It's a show of force. It's meant to intimidate and isolate the leadership in Caracas.
But the most disruptive strategy, even more than the warship sitting there, seems to be the direct targeting of the country's main source of revenue.
The oil.
The oil.
That is the core calculus driving the economic pressure. The U.S. military has physically seized oil tankers on the high seas that were carrying sanctioned Venezuelan oil.
And the stated goal behind that is pretty blunt.
It's very straightforward. Massively disrupt the oil revenue, starve the government of resources, and hope that causes the military leadership to lose faith in President Maduro.
The expectation is that the military will abandon him, forcing a political change.
And you get your regime change, ideally, without having to use ground troops. It is a severe application of economic strangulation designed to force a political collapse from within.
And the situation feels like it's escalating beyond just sanctions and a blockade. The risk of actual kinetic conflict seems very real.
It does. We've seen some really troubling reports of the U.S. military shooting down a boat that was allegedly involved in drug smuggling near Venezuelan waters. You couple that with President Trump's very blunt, very direct public threat to Maduro telling him, if he plays tough now, it's the last time. That signals a pretty significant and dangerous willingness to use lethal force.
So there's active speculation about ground troops.
There is. Active and ongoing speculation, which just raises the stakes for the entire region and threatens to trigger a major international crisis.
So this conflict isn't just a regional issue anymore. It's escalated to become a major flashpoint for the UN Security Council.
Oh, it's a full-blown global standoff.
And lines are drawn.
Deeply entrenched. It makes a diplomatic resolution incredibly difficult. Venezuela gets full, unwavering political and security support from Russia. They see the U.S. actions as an illegal, destabilizing intervention that violates international norms.
And then you have China.
Then you have China, which acts as this crucial economic counterweight. China's the largest single buyer of Venezuelan oil, and they've been very quick to criticize the U.S. intervention. So you have a major global conflict with three world powers backing three different corners.
And that level of external support just guarantees that this is going to be a long, painful standoff.
A protracted, economically painful, and potentially violent confrontation. Observers are deeply concerned.
And this is where we need to pivot right back to the human costs. All this maneuvering, all this diplomacy, it has an immediate, devastating impact on the very people who are supposedly being saved.
It does.
Can you share an anecdote from the sources that really crystallizes this anxiety in Venezuela?
The anxiety is more than just a generalized fear. It's become this paralyzing economic apprehension. Our sources give this really poignant example of Marie's craft shop in Caracas.
Okay.
It's a business that's been open, serving the community for 56 continuous years.
Wow, 56 years.
And this year, the business is suffering immensely. Why? Because people are simply too hesitant to spend any money at all. They cite this immense, ever-present concern over the crisis with the United States.
So they're hoarding their money.
They're hoarding every single bolivar. They're terrified of hyperinflation or a complete economic collapse. And that deep existential anxiety just ripples through every market, every household in the country.
And the deeper tragedy, as the sources articulated, is that this strategic pressure is hitting the most vulnerable people the hardest. It's actually undermining the stated goal of liberation.
That is the fundamental, tragic flaw in the strategy. The source material notes that when these severe shortages hit, a sudden lack of gasoline, widespread food scarcity, the elites, who are the intended target, are the best insulated.
Of course.
They still manage to get the scarce gasoline. The money that does trickle through the sanctions still reaches them first, through black markets or privileged access. The economic pain is borne disproportionately by the poorest populations.
So who is truly suffering?
The street vendor, the low-wage worker, the family trying to feed their kids. The real immediate fear among the common population isn't just a political shift, it's absolute starvation. It's a lack of basic services.
It's life and death.
The sources warn that there may tragically be fatalities as this crisis worsens, all while the elite remain safe, protected by their wealth. And it raises this crucial ethical question that the sources implicitly pose. If your goal is political change through economic warfare, at what human cost is that acceptable? And who truly pays that price?
It's a truly devastating consequence. It connects these global power plays directly to a family in Venezuela not being able to buy dinner. Let's shift now, but let's maintain this thread of high-stakes diplomacy and human movement. Let's move to the complex maneuvering required to deal with another massive global strain, migration and displacement, specifically focusing on Germany. So this next segment highlights this extremely sensitive, politically charged, and just logistically complicated topic of deportations from Germany.
It really does.
And it reveals the shifting diplomatic relationships that are necessary to make these returns happen. And then it contrasts that with these huge massive returns happening elsewhere in the region, driven purely by economic breakdown.
This segment clearly demonstrates a decisive government goal in Germany. And that goal is to pursue regular returns, even to conflict zones and, failed states that were previously considered too dangerous or too politically inaccessible for these kinds of procedures.
Right.
The material highlights two very specific, very diplomatically significant breakthroughs that have allowed Germany to resume returns, focusing at first on convicted offenders to both Syria and Afghanistan. Hashtag 2.1, Germany's return of convicted offenders to Syria and Afghanistan.
Let's start with Syria, because this is a monumental shift. The German government has carried out the first deportation of a convicted criminal to Syria since the Civil War began.
Back in 2011.
That's a decade of stasis.
Yeah.
Just broken.
Yeah.
Can you detail the gravity of this case?
This was a deeply symbolic and highly scrutinized transfer. The individual had been jailed in North Rhine-Westphalia, convicted of severe crimes, robbery, assault, extortion. The deportation itself was complex. He was escorted by federal police, transferred directly to authorities in Damascus on a scheduled flight.
And the significance is the destination.
It's all about the destination. Syria is considered profoundly unsafe. So coordinating an official transfer of a state prisoner with the Damascus regime, that breaks a long-standing diplomatic freeze.
And this was only possible because of a new bilateral agreement.
That's the key takeaway. This was enabled by a new, highly delicate agreement with the Syrian government. It now allows for the regular return of both convicted criminals and what are called Gefährder,
Which is a threat to public safety.
a German legal term for an individual deemed a significant threat to public safety, yes. And what's really revealing for the long-term political strategy is the cross-party determination to get this done. The sources note this was being actively pursued even by the previous administration.
So it wasn't just one party's idea.
No. The former Interior Minister, Felser, had traveled to Syria for preparatory talks right before her term ended. It signals this persistent, multi-year, cross-party determination to open these routes, regardless of the ongoing humanitarian and security concerns inside Syria.
That desire for direct talks, for bypassing intermediaries and normalizing communication with difficult regimes, it seems to be a central part of the new strategy. We see it mirrored even more starkly with Afghanistan.
Absolutely. The Afghan situation is maybe even more diplomatically sensitive given the regime that's in power there. We've seen a recent individual deportation to Afghanistan, an offender jailed in Bavaria for assault. And this wasn't a one-off. It was the second such individual return in a short period.
And this is different from the mass deportations we saw before.
It contrasts sharply with those previous larger operations, like the mass deportations earlier this summer, where over 80 men were returned all at once.
So how significant is this shift in methodology? How they're dealing with Afghanistan given the Taliban takeover?
The change in diplomatic method is massive. Previously, especially right after the Taliban seized control of Kabul, Germany was relying heavily on third-party mediators.
Specifically Qatar.
Specifically Qatar, for managing that first mass deportation. And that reliance was essential because Germany does not maintain formal diplomatic relations with the Taliban government. They're a non-state actor, internationally recognized mostly for human rights abuses.
But the sources indicate the Interior Ministry wasn't happy with that arrangement.
Precisely. The Interior Minister reportedly expressed dissatisfaction with having to use a mediating country for every single return. The strategic goal was clear. Germany needed the ability to conduct independent deportations, even individual ones, quickly and efficiently.
Without having to ask another country for help every time.
Exactly, without having to petition an external country for assistance.
So the diplomatic shift was to go directly to Kabul.
Yes. The material confirms that representatives from the German Interior Ministry were sent directly to Kabul to negotiate with the Taliban leadership. They struck a new agreement that lets Germany carry out independent individual deportations directly.
Wow.
Think about the magnitude of that. It effectively removes the need for a mediator country. It streamlines the whole process. And for the Taliban, even if Germany insists this is purely practical and not formal recognition, this engagement represents a massive, undeniable diplomatic upgrade, a functional normalization of their regime. Hashtag 2.2, the political divide over deportation policy.
Well, given that normalization, even a functional one, this policy is inevitably creating deep divisions within German politics.
It's generated fierce critique. The policy is particularly opposed by the Left Party, Die Linke. They oppose all deportations to both Syria and Afghanistan, regardless of the person's criminal status.
Their argument is purely humanitarian.
Their core argument rests on the extremely precarious humanitarian and security situations in both countries. They insist that returning people to these zones fundamentally violates principles of safety and humanitarian protection.
And the Green Party, maybe less absolute, has a very pointed criticism about these direct talks with the Taliban.
That's the most potent criticism. The Greens specifically criticize the decision to engage in direct negotiations. Their concern is that these talks constitute diplomatic recognition, or at the very least, a significant diplomatic upgrade for a regime condemned for restricting the rights of women and minorities.
They see it as sacrificing principles for expediency.
That's it. Sacrificing principle for easier border control. They argue it's unacceptable. The Greens much preferred maintaining the use of intermediaries like Qatar, and they also pointed to some suspicious timing.
Oh.
That Taliban diplomats were reportedly accredited in Germany around the same time as that summer mass deportation, implying a kind of transactional relationship that risks legitimizing the regime.
On the other side of the political spectrum, you have the AfD arguing the government is moving too slowly.
Exactly. The Alternative for Germany party argues that the government's efforts, even with these breakthroughs, are fundamentally insufficient. Not enough, given the scale of the challenge and the number of convicted offenders and Gefährder still in the country.
So the government is caught in the middle.
In a very difficult position, criticized severely by the left and Greens for normalizing relations with dangerous regimes, and at the same time criticized by the AfD for being too soft and ineffective.
So now that they've secured these mechanisms, what are the future implications? Do they plan to stop at just criminals and threats?
The declared goal is to establish and conduct regular returns to both countries. And while the current priority is absolutely restricted to criminals and Gefährder, the government's own coalition agreement, it contains language that implies a future, broader intention.
So this is just the first step.
The long-term policy goal seems to be that once the security situation in these countries allows for it, the framework could potentially be extended to deport Syrians and Afghans who lose their protection status, even if they aren't criminals or threats. This initial high-stakes wave of deportations is clearly meant to pave the way for a broader strategy of returns.
That complex diplomatic maneuvering in Germany, it contrasts so starkly with the next data point, which is just a heartbreaking regional pushback driven purely by economic collapse.
The Iran-Afghanistan displacement crisis.
Exactly. Hashtag 2.3, the Iran-Afghanistan displacement crisis.
This is a major regional humanitarian event that's unfolding with almost no global attention, but it's massive in scale. We're talking about the mass, unwilling deportation of Afghan refugees from Iran.
Refugees who have been there for decades.
Decades, sometimes 2 or 3 generations of displacement seeking protection from civil war and the Taliban. Since last March, a staggering 500,000 people, 500,000, have returned to Afghanistan.
The sources say half of those were unwilling.
Fully half were unwilling returns, driven by Iran's severe ongoing economic crisis.
And their lives in Iran were already so precarious, lived in the shadows, with no real legal security.
That is the crucial context that makes this so tragic. The vast majority of Afghans in Iran are not formally recognized as refugees. That means they are systematically denied fundamental rights.
What does that look like in practice?
Our sources paint a bleak picture. They're often unable to leave the specific city where they live. They can't legally exchange currency. They're barred from buying bus tickets to travel between cities. And critically, their children are frequently barred from legally enrolling in Iranian schools.
It's a life of systemic oppression.
It is a life where basic freedoms are withheld, making them highly vulnerable to sudden policy changes.
And even those who manage to get the right paperwork live in constant fear.
We have the direct example of Obaid, a 30-year-old man in Tehran. He actually has valid residency papers, yet he lives in the state of constant pervasive fear. He restricts his movements, work, and straight back home. Takes a taxi to avoid any street confrontation.
Why?
Because the possibility is always there that authorities could do a snap check, arrest him regardless of his papers, tear up his documents on the spot, and instantly trigger his deportation.
Unbelievable.
And for those who are sent back, many unwillingly, the future in Taliban-ruled Afghanistan is entirely unknown and often terrifying. But they have absolutely no choice in the matter.
The juxtaposition, again, is just so stark. Aggressive diplomatic talks costing huge political capital to send back a few convicted criminals from Germany versus these mass human waves driven out of Iran by pure economic desperation.
And they both converge on an already unstable Afghanistan. It brings us right back to our opening theme: global strains manifesting in immediate, localized, and profoundly unfair suffering. The pressure on the Iranian economy, which is exacerbated by sanctions and internal mismanagement, it triggers a massive migration crisis that destabilizes a neighboring country, Afghanistan, which is already reeling from decades of conflict. The economic security of one nation dictates the physical displacement and suffering of 500,000 vulnerable people.
Let's pivot now. Let's bring the focus back entirely to the domestic front here in Germany and look at how all this global instability and the cost of security translates into tangible strain on the social safety net.
Especially during the high-demand holiday season.
Exactly. We've seen the cost of global strategy in the Arctic and the Caribbean and the immense diplomatic and human cost of migration policy. Now we explore the domestic cost of living and the high cost of maintaining public life during a time of elevated terror threat.
This segment is vital because it completes the circle. It shows how those abstract factors, global conflict, energy prices, international security posturing, how they translate directly into concrete, immediate domestic financial burdens. Right down to the cost of a cup of hot-spiced wine at a Christmas market. Hashtag TAG 3.1, the high cost of holiday security, Christmas markets.
Let's start with a bit of good news, though. The sources do confirm that the Christmas markets were successful. They were well visited, especially on weekends.
People were determined to go.
They were. Visitors expressed this strong, deliberate refusal to let potential security threats ruin the experience. They chose community, they chose shared enjoyment, and that resilience is commendable.
Absolutely. However, that resilience comes at a very high, very measurable price. And that's the price of the security required to make that public display of resilience possible.
The concrete bollard.
Right. Due to the ongoing terror threat, which is often linked to the international conflicts we were just discussing, markets had to significantly ramp up their security infrastructure. That means installing pervasive physical defenses, massive concrete slabs, heavy bollards in places like Potsdam, all designed to protect visitors from potential vehicle attacks.
And these essential measures, which are now mandatory, are completely changing the economics of the markets themselves.
They're causing a massive economic shockwave. The sources reveal that stand rental prices have reportedly nearly tripled compared to the previous year.
Rippled.
Nearly tripled. And when you break down that cost increase, security is cited overwhelmingly as the primary driver. This presents a major dilemma about who pays the bill. Local governments contribute minimally.
So it falls on the organizers.
It pushes the vast majority of the expensive security costs onto the event organizers, who then inevitably have to pass that crippling cost onto the vendors.
And the vendors have no choice but to pass it on to the consumer, pushing prices higher and higher.
And potentially pricing out their traditional visitor base. We're seeing a significant pricing struggle across the country. Glühwein, the iconic Christmas drink, has hit €5 for a regular cup.
And that's before the deposit on the mug.
That's often not even including the €3 deposit for the mug. If you want a shot of spirits in it, the total cost for one warm drink can quickly jump to €10.
Wow.
And vendors are expressing genuine, heartfelt concern that they are rapidly approaching the absolute limits of what the average consumer can reasonably afford. It jeopardizes the whole point of keeping the markets accessible and inclusive for everyone, regardless of their income.
That sentiment, the markets need to be for everyone. It's a clear recognition that the cost of security can't outpace the affordability of the public event itself.
Or you risk segmenting society even in moments of celebration. It creates this painful internal strain, a direct trade-off between public safety and public accessibility. How much are we willing to pay to feel secure?
And this strain on affordability leads us right to the crisis facing Germany's social safety net.
Absolutely. Hashtag 3.2, the strained social safety net, TAFOM. The TAFOM, Germany's nationwide network of food banks, they play this absolutely vital life-sustaining role. They distribute surplus food to about 1.5 million registered needy individuals.
1.5 million.
And what's really sobering is the demographic breakdown. Almost a third of these recipients, around 500,000 people, are children.
And the current year has presented this unique, almost unprecedented difficulty for these organizations.
It's a difficulty that stems from a fundamental shift in demographics and financial stability. The head of the TAFL in Potsdam, Imke Georgi, she noted explicitly that this year is particularly taxing. They're seeing an increasing number of residents who have always lived in the community.
So not just new arrivals.
Not just new arrivals or refugees, but longtime residents who had previously managed to stay financially afloat. These are people who have suddenly found they can no longer cope with the simultaneous massive rising costs for food, energy, and rent.
So inflation and soaring utility costs are pushing a whole new population into poverty.
A new category of deep existential poverty.
So the demand is no longer just high. It's overwhelming the existing, mostly volunteer-run infrastructure.
The sources reveal an alarming and systemic statistic. Nearly a quarter, roughly 25% of the over 970 TAFL nationwide have been forced to establish strict waiting lists.
Or worse.
Or, even more worrying, have simply ceased accepting any new clients because they cannot physically handle the massive surge in demand. This isn't a localized problem. This is a critical national indicator of a social safety net strained to its breaking point.
And who is relying on this aid now? You said it's a diverse group.
It's a true cross-section of vulnerability. It includes newly arrived refugees, people receiving the main state benefit called Bürgergeld, and this is crucial to understanding the strained people with low incomes or small fixed pensions who are suddenly finding their meager funds are not enough. We hear from one recipient who says, "Money is not enough. We get food here and cook at home." It just illustrates that the service isn't a luxury. It's a necessity for day-to-day survival, for preventing outright hunger.
And when a quarter of your food aid system is turning people away, this has to lead to political criticism.
The criticism is sharp, and it's directed at the government's priorities. Critics argue the government is failing to address the fundamental economic insecurity of its citizens. They're doing too little to combat poverty.
They point to superficial measures.
Right, like renaming the core welfare benefit to Bürgergeld or basic security doesn't actually provide the financial security needed to survive. The TAFN themselves are begging for more fundamental financial support, even for basic things like paying for gasoline to transport the food donations.
It's a clear signal that while the government is focused on expanding global influence in the Golden Fleet, the fundamental security of its poorest citizens, food and housing security, is rapidly eroding.
Exactly. When your foundational, volunteer-driven food aid system is turning people away, it signals a deep systemic issue concerning domestic stability. And it should be treated with the same urgency as any international military threat. The cost of neglect is substantial. Hashtag 3.3, working through the holidays.
Let's end the domestic segment by recognizing the essential workforce that keeps the country running, even when most people are celebrating.
And the interesting cultural dynamics that allow this to happen.
Right. A detailed study found that close to 1 in 10 employees in Germany works during the Christmas holidays. And these aren't optional jobs.
No, these are critical system-relevant areas: hospitals, nursing homes, the energy grid, and critically transportation companies that keep essential services moving.
And for this workforce, working during the holidays isn't just a professional necessity. It can be a real financial opportunity.
That financial incentive is the key driver for many. We have the excellent example of a bus driver, Halim Miftari. He specifically says he enjoys working at Christmas because the pay is so good.
What kind of pay are we talking about?
According to his tariff agreement, bus drivers get a tax-free 100% bonus on public holidays. He can earn about €350 per shift. That makes working the holidays very attractive compared to a standard shift. It helps essential services manage staffing.
And it's also interesting to look at the changing demographics of this holiday workforce. It speaks to a quiet, functional form of integration.
There is a notable and vital trend here. Many individuals who are most willing to work during these culturally significant Christian holidays are often those with migrant backgrounds for whom Christmas holds less religious or cultural significance.
Or just people who aren't religious.
Exactly. That group also includes Christians with a low church affiliation. And this demographic shift is crucial for managing the persistent staffing shortages in public services, especially in areas like public transportation where native German drivers are becoming scarcer.
So it creates this pragmatic system of mutual support based on accommodating different cultural calendars.
It's the perfect example of a pragmatic balancing act that allows a modern, diverse state to function. The sources note that Halim Miftari, a Muslim driver from Kosovo, Albania, he specifically reserves time off for the Festival of the Sacrifice.
Which is more important to him?
Culturally and religiously more important to him. And during that time, he relies on his Christian colleagues to cover his shifts, knowing he will return the favor over Christmas.
That's a real day-to-day cultural accommodation and mutual reliance.
And it's essential for maintaining smooth operations in public services. It's a quiet example of systems relying on cultural diversity to solve staffing challenges.
It is a quiet, necessary example of integration, ensuring the buses run while everyone else is home celebrating. #outro.
So we have completed a pretty comprehensive deep dive today, tracing these complex lines of strain across the globe and, right down to the kitchen table. We began in the freezing Arctic and the tense Caribbean, where the U.S. is aggressively redefining its sphere of influence, spending vast capital to challenge sovereignty and project military power.
Then we move through the fraught geopolitics of deportation, looking at the intense diplomatic costs for Germany to open routes to hostile regimes in Syria and Afghanistan.
And contrasted that with the mass, heartbreaking human tragedy unfolding at the Iran-Afghanistan border, driven by pure economic desperation.
And finally, we looked inward at the domestic economy, where the escalating cost of essential public security triples the price of a market stall, and systemic overload means food banks, the last line of defense, are turning away longtime residents who just can't afford the basic cost of living anymore.
And these threads are not coincidences.
No, they're all interconnected facets of an increasingly strained global and local environment. Global military posturing dictates internal spending priorities. International economic pressure fuels humanitarian crises that spill across borders,
Forcing domestic social services to their absolute limits.
So what does this all mean for you? It means that understanding what national security means today requires looking far beyond a new naval buildup or the Golden Fleet or some high-stakes diplomatic deal in Kabul.
You have to examine the allocation of resources.
That is where the analysis truly lands. We see the immense costs and diplomatic capital invested in these aggressive global security projects. Naval expansion, appointing special envoys to challenge an ally's sovereignty,
Negotiating directly with a pariah regime like the Taliban, these efforts consume staggering resources.
and this spending stands in sharp, painful contrast to the financial and logistical crises facing the domestic safety net.
The system is so strained that a quarter of the country's primary food banks are now putting people on wait lists, and the cost of essential security is threatening to make public gatherings unaffordable.
So what does this extreme prioritization reveal about our collective definition of national security in the modern age? I mean, if large segments of the population lack food security and financial stability, and if the social safety nets are collapsing, is the nation truly secure, regardless of the size of its fleet?
And that is the provocative thought we'll leave you with. The necessity of adopting a holistic view of security, one that includes not only military might and global influence, but also robust social welfare and the stability of the essential safety nets at home. The deep dive continues next time.